Amelia Mary Earhart was born on July 24, 1897, in her grandmother's house in Atchison, Kansas. The home stood on a hill above the town, an 11-room house run with the formality of an upper-middle-class household. Maids managed the daily work, a cook prepared the meals, and dinner was served on fine china, a quiet sign of the family's comfort on her mother's side. Yet behind this surface of security there was instability. While her maternal grandparents were financially secure, her father, Edwin Earhart, struggled to keep a steady job. In Kansas City, he barely managed to make the payments on the family home. The Earharts lived with constant anxiety over money, even as Amelia remained deeply attached to her parents, particularly to her charming and fun-loving father. When Amelia was 7, Edwin was finally able to afford a grand outing. He took the family to the St. Louis World's Fair in Missouri, one of the great spectacles of the early 20th century. 20 million people would visit the 1904 fair, where 45 countries presented themselves to the world. There, Amelia and her younger sister Muriel walked among exhibits that brought distant cultures to life. They saw recreated Eskimo villages and carefully designed Japanese gardens. Each country and each American state displayed its own identity, its technology, and its customs. Among the attractions that captured the girls' attention was a large roller coaster, powerful, noisy, and thrilling. When the family returned to Kansas City, Amelia did not simply remember the ride. She decided to recreate it. With the help of Muriel, an uncle, and a friend, she built a homemade roller coaster in the backyard. Wooden tracks were laid from the roof of a shed down to the ground, and a small cart was set to run along them. The tracks were greased to make the cart move faster. True to her nature as the boldest child in the neighborhood, Amelia volunteered to test it first. She pushed the cart to the top, climbed in, and signaled her sister to release her. The cart shot down the steep track and she crashed at the bottom. It was a hard lesson in gravity and speed. Yet the fall did not discourage her. The group adjusted the track, making it less steep, and Amelia climbed back into the cart. This time the ride was smoother, and she felt the rush of speed, a sensation that would later echo in her flying. Even as a young girl, she was drawn to motion, risk, and the feeling of leaving the ordinary ground behind. One cold December day, Amelia and Muriel went sledding. Seeking greater speed, Amelia ran, dove onto the sled head first, and lay on her stomach as it shot down the icy hill. Very quickly she realized there was danger ahead. A horse-drawn wagon moved into her path from a side street, and she had no way to stop. In a split second, she made her decision. She ducked low and slid under the horse, emerging on the other side shaken but unharmed. It was an early demonstration of the quick judgment and calm under pressure that would later define her as an aviator. The summer before she entered 8th grade, Amelia attended the Iowa State Fair. There, in 1909, only 6 years after the Wright brothers' first powered flight at Kitty Hawk, she saw an airplane for the first time. It was a fragile machine by modern standards, a symbol of a new age. Yet for Amelia, it did not immediately ignite a passion. She was already adventurous, but the idea of flying had not yet taken hold. Her teenage years would prove far more turbulent than her early childhood experiments with speed. Her father's continuing difficulty in keeping work put increasing strain on the family. Eventually, the household broke apart. Her mother took Amelia and Muriel to Chicago, where they lived in a boarding house. Amelia enrolled at Hyde Park High School and tried to shape a future in the midst of uncertainty. She was a capable and serious student, and she dreamed of attending a top university. Financial reality stood in her way. The family did not have the means to support such ambitions. Even so, her mother managed to send her to a good private school for girls, offering Amelia a more stable environment and a chance to claim a life of her own. In the autumn of 1916, at the age of 19, Amelia travelled east by train to the Agont School in Pennsylvania. She did not mind the distance from home. For her, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, a deliberate step toward independence and education. The head of the school, Miss Sutherland, made a strong impression. At first, Amelia did not feel close to her, but over time she developed a deep respect. Miss Sutherland was strict yet highly intelligent, a woman with firm opinions and a clear sense of purpose. She had chosen a career over marriage, turning down opportunities to wed in favour of professional life. For Amelia and her classmates, she became a living example of an independent woman at a time when such choices were still unusual. Among students and teachers, Amelia herself was well regarded. She was shy yet quietly charismatic, athletic and practical in her habits. She lived modestly, was careful with money, and even bought used shoes from a friend when she needed them. Her character combined reserve with generosity, and she often expressed concern for her family's needs before her own. During her second year at Augance, Amelia's peers elected her vice president of her class. She also wrote the class motto, capturing her belief that true courage rests upon a foundation of personal honour. It was a concise statement of the values that would guide her throughout her life. While she was still at Augance, the world beyond the school walls changed dramatically. The United States entered World War I, and the conflict reshaped the lives of millions. During the Christmas holidays of 1917, Amelia travelled to Toronto, Canada, to visit Muriel, who was studying there. Their mother joined them, and the family was briefly reunited. In Toronto, Amelia saw the cost of modern warfare at close range. She encountered soldiers who had been wounded in battle and witnessed the human toll of the conflict. The experience affected her deeply. Within a week, she made a decisive choice. She would not return to Augance. Instead, she remained in Toronto to train as a nurse's aide. She began working in a hospital, caring for injured servicemen and supporting the war effort as best she could. For those who knew her, this decision came as no surprise. Even in her youth, Amelia Earhart consistently followed her convictions, choosing difficult paths when they aligned with her sense of duty and purpose. She stayed in Toronto as the war continued, dedicating herself to the demanding work of a military hospital that treated soldiers returning from the European front. As the conflict drew to a close, Amelia carried with her a renewed sense of purpose and a growing interest in science. When World War I ended, she returned to the United States, hopeful that she might one day become a doctor, and enrolled at Columbia University in New York City to pursue that goal. The social expectations of the era were clear. Most men expected their wives to remain at home, and many women accepted that future without question. Amelia did not. She struggled to understand why marriage should limit a woman's ambitions or prevent her from seeking meaningful work. She wanted a career, yet she was still unsure of which path to follow. After a period of study at Columbia, financial strain forced her to withdraw. Her parents had reunited, and Amelia moved with them to Los Angeles, where the family hoped she would soon settle into a more traditional life. She was seeing a young man named Sam Chapman, who proposed marriage. Amelia refused. She understood he would not support her desire for independence, and though she knew what she did not want, she still felt without direction. That changed in December 1920. At 23, Amelia stood with her father among a crowd gathered in Long Beach, California, watching an air show. Pilots raced their aircraft across the sky and performed aerial stunts, including the daring feat of wing walking. The spectacle captured her attention with extraordinary force. One question began to dominate her thoughts. She wanted to know how much flying lessons would cost. Aviation was still in its earlier stage. There were no paved runways, only open fields where aircraft lifted off from uneven ground. 3 days after the air show, Amelia and her father visited nearby Rogers Field, where she took her first flight. The ride lasted only 10 minutes. She sat behind the pilot in an open cockpit, the wind tearing past as the plane bounced over the rough field and slowly rose into the air. In that moment, she felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. She knew she wanted to fly. For the first time in years, she had a clear goal. At the Kinner Airfield, Amelia met Neta Snook, a pioneering woman aviator who agreed to teach her. Instruction cost $1 per minute, a significant expense at the time, but Amelia was determined. She walked 3 miles from the streetcar to the airfield for her first lesson, arriving in boots, a jacket, and riding pants. She felt no fatigue. She felt only anticipation as her dream began to take shape. Her early lessons were spent taxiing around the field, but she soon took to the air. Flying came naturally to her. She studied constantly, practiced whenever weather allowed, and learned basic mechanics so she could repair aircraft herself. She cut her hair short and purchased a leather jacket, which quickly took on the marks of oil and use that signalled her growing identity as a pilot. With help from her mother, Amelia eventually purchased her first airplane. It was a small yellow craft that Neta believed was too light to be safe, but Amelia disagreed. She named it Canary and flew it with pride. On December 15, 1921, less than 1 year after beginning lessons, She passed her test and became a licensed pilot. After earning her license, Amelia participated in regional air shows. A woman pilot drew considerable attention, and although she disliked the spotlight, she needed the income these exhibitions provided. When Neta married and ended her flying career, Amelia sought further instruction and began training with Monte Montijo, an experienced military and stunt pilot. Under his guidance, she learned advanced techniques, including aerobatic maneuvers such as inverted loops. Soon, she decided to attempt her first aviation record. She had an altimeter installed in her plane and set out to see how high she could climb. Open cockpits exposed pilots to cold temperatures and thin air at altitude, yet Amelia accepted the risks. It took 2 attempts, carried out in fog and sleet. She eventually reached 14,000 feet before her engine began to fail. She descended rapidly and landed safely, achieving the altitude record she sought. Despite her love of flying, Amelia soon realized she could not support herself through aviation alone. Commercial flight barely existed, and most Americans had never set foot in an airplane. By 1924, economic needs forced her to pause her dream. She sold Canary and used the money to buy a yellow convertible she called Yellow Peril. With her mother as a companion, she drove across the country to the East Coast. She returned once more to Columbia University, but again withdrew due to financial strain. Around this time, Sam Chapman renewed his proposal. Amelia was 28, an age when many believed unmarried women had missed their opportunity for marriage. The offer promised financial security, but the expectation of domestic life held no appeal for her. She declined again. Her desire for freedom outweighed every other consideration. Her next step brought her to Boston, where she worked at Denison House, a settlement home serving poor children. She took great satisfaction from the work, believing deeply in its purpose. Flying became a weekend pursuit, something she continued to study even from a distance. In 1927, aviation captured the world's attention when Charles Lindbergh completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic Ocean. His success inspired new attempts by aviators worldwide. A wealthy woman in London, Amy Guest, wished to become the first woman to cross the Atlantic by air, though only as a passenger. She hired New York publisher George Putnam to organize the venture. When her family refused to let her make the flight, Putnam needed a replacement. This time he wanted a woman with both courage and aviation experience. Through his wide network of contacts, he sought recommendations. One name quickly rose to the top: Amelia Earhart. Soon afterward, Amelia met with publisher George Putnam and socialite Amy Guest in New York, where both immediately recognized that she matched the qualities they were searching for. She was poised, well-educated, and carried herself with quiet confidence. She was offered the role on the historic flight and accepted it. The position itself was far less glamorous than the public would later believe. Amelia would receive no salary. The pilot, Wilma Stultz, was paid $20,000, while Amelia, despite being publicly described as the captain, would travel as a passenger. She accepted because no woman had yet crossed the Atlantic by air, and the chance to be part of that crossing held enormous significance. She also understood that if the flight succeeded, the attention might open future doors for her as a working pilot. The risk was considerable. Charles Lindbergh had completed his solo crossing only the year before, but 14 others had died attempting the journey. 3 of those lost had been women, and 2 more were preparing their own transatlantic efforts. If Amelia hoped to be the first woman to make the crossing, she had to move quickly. The 3-engined Fokker seaplane, named Friendship, departed from Boston on June 3, 1928. Poor weather forced the crew to land in Canada, where they remained grounded for days, waiting for conditions to improve. During this delay, Amelia discovered another danger. The pilot, Wilma Stultz, drank heavily, and she knew that if he arrived at the cockpit in that condition, the results could be disastrous. Yet the longer they remained on the ground, the greater the chance that another woman would reach the Atlantic first. On June 16th, Amelia resolved to move forward. The crew prepared to depart the following day. On the morning of June 17th, she sent a brief coded telegram to George Putnam in Boston, using the word Violet to signal that the Friendship was finally taking off. During the transatlantic flight, Stultz and his co-pilot, Louis Slim Gordon, alternated at the controls while Amelia kept a steady record in her journal. After 20 hours in the air, they realized that fuel was running low and the outcome remained uncertain. At last, land appeared. The Friendship touched down at Bury Port in South Wales, 20 hours and 40 minutes after leaving the Canadian coast. On June 18, 1928, Amelia Earhart became the first woman to cross the Atlantic by air. Although she had not piloted the aircraft, the public saw her as fearless, and the impact on her life was immediate. In Britain, she was received by high society and welcomed into the circles of the wealthy and influential. She was even received by members of the royal household. When she returned to the United States, the reaction was even more intense. Parades were organized in her honor. Crowds gathered to see the woman who had faced the Atlantic. Many observers compared her to Charles Lindbergh. Her tall, slender frame and composed manner reminded people of the celebrated aviator, and the press began to call her Lady Lindy. George Putnam, now managing her public image, saw enormous potential in this growing fame. The attention, however, came with a cost. Large crowds sometimes overwhelmed her, and the expectations placed upon her could be unsettling. Yet Amelia understood that public visibility was essential if she wanted to keep flying, set new records, and help aviation grow. She believed that the more people became interested in air travel, the stronger the young airline industry would become, and she intended to play a role in that transformation. Paid lectures became a crucial source of income. Each speech meant more funds for aircraft, fuel, and maintenance. With her own planes, she could attempt new records, which in turn generated more invitations and more earnings. For the first time, Amelia began to sense that she might make a genuine living through aviation. George Putnam became her formal agent and arranged a relentless schedule of appearances. In only 6 months, she delivered more than 100 speeches and gave over 200 interviews. She accepted a new car as a promotional gift for attending an automobile show and licensed her name to various companies for advertising. In a major New York department store, the Amelia Earhart flying suit, a leather outfit lined with fur, attracted considerable attention. She also accepted a position as an editor at Cosmopolitan magazine, overseeing a column on aviation. Writing was not her favorite activity, but the role further increased her visibility, and many readers came to regard her as a strong example for modern women. By 1929, Amelia Earhart was the most famous woman pilot in the United States. Yet beyond fame, what she desired most was more time in the air. A week before her 32nd birthday, she acquired a used Lockheed Vega. The aircraft was large and demanding to fly, yet it offered high speed and long range. Amelia saw in it the potential for future records and began to plan her next achievements. That same summer, a new event marked an important moment in women's aviation. The first women's cross-country air race was announced, stretching from Santa Monica, California to Cleveland, Ohio. It was officially called the Women's Air Derby. The winner would be the pilot who completed the route in the shortest total time. Amelia was eager to join the field. The course, which crossed the Rocky Mountains, posed genuine danger. The race committee considered altering the route or assigning male navigators to each woman pilot. Amelia and many others were outraged. They had logged many hours flying alone and saw no justification for special restrictions. Amelia insisted she would not participate if she could not fly solo. Under pressure from the pilots, the committee relented. The women would fly unaccompanied. On August 18, 1929, an estimated 20,000 spectators gathered in Santa Monica to watch the start. 19 women took off, including Amelia. Some commentators mocked the event. One prominent writer dismissed it as the Powder Puff Derby. In the air, however, the competition and the risks were very real. Mechanical issues and poor field conditions plagued the race. On the second day, Amelia's plane overturned during a landing. She escaped injury, repaired the aircraft, and continued. Other pilots were less fortunate. Some aircraft skidded off rough runways and crashed, and one pilot died in the Arizona mountains. By August 25th, the race concluded. Only 11 of the 19 entrants finished the full distance. Amelia Earhart placed third. She did not win, but she gained valuable experience and formed lasting connections with many of the leading women aviators in the country. In the months that followed, these pilots decided to create a formal organization to support one another. On November 2, 1929, 26 women gathered in a hangar on Long Island, New York, to establish a new association. They debated what to call themselves and eventually chose to name the group after the number of charter members. As additional pilots joined, the working name shifted from the 86 to the 97, and finally settled as the 99. Amelia devoted herself to expanding the membership. Within a year, nearly 200 women had joined. The 99 helped female pilots find work in aviation and carefully documented their achievements. Amelia Earhart was elected as the organization's first president, a role that reflected the respect she had earned among her peers. In private moments, she sometimes felt uneasy about the extent of public admiration, yet among fellow pilots she knew that her skills, perseverance and leadership were genuinely valued, and that recognition meant the most to her. In the wider world, events were shifting. In the fall of 1929, the stock market crashed, setting off the Great Depression. Across the United States, families lost savings, homes and jobs. Amelia faced these years with added responsibility. Her parents had separated again. Her mother lived with Muriel and her husband, and Amelia regularly sent money to support them. Her father, in fragile health, occupied a small log cabin near Los Angeles. Amelia purchased the cabin for him, determined to provide some measure of stability. Despite her fame, earning a steady income in those years was difficult. She continued to give lectures, but she also took on new work. She helped establish an airline on the East Coast, the New York, Philadelphia and Washington Airway, which linked those cities by air. Her main responsibility was to persuade a cautious public to fly. Operating an airline in that early period was an intricate undertaking. Only a limited number of cities had proper airfields. On one occasion, 3 planes arrived in Philadelphia at nearly the same time. As passengers changed aircraft or stepped out for a brief rest, ground crews became confused and directed people onto the wrong flights. Some passengers were unintentionally flown back to the city they had just left. Passengers also contended with the physical discomforts of early air travel. Cabins were unpressurized and often hot. Engine fumes seeped inside. Air was turbulent and there were no modern systems to steady the ride. On some flights, more than half of the travelers became airsick. Yet despite these challenges, more than 1,500 passengers flew on the small airline within its first 10 days of operation. Amelia took particular satisfaction in the fact that nearly half of the tickets were purchased by women, a sign, she believed, that attitudes toward aviation were beginning to change. Alongside her work with the airline and her support for her family, Amelia continued to chase aviation records. That remained essential to her public identity and to her own sense of purpose. In the summer of 1930, she set 3 new speed records, reaching a top recorded speed of 180 miles per hour. For comparison, a modern commercial jet would later cruise at roughly 3 to 4 times that velocity. These were years of both achievement and strain. In September 1930, Amelia received difficult news. Her father had been diagnosed with cancer and had little time left. She flew to California and spent 4 days at his side caring for him and saying a final goodbye. While she was returning to New York, word reached her that he had died. The loss weighed heavily upon her. She missed her father deeply and faced mounting pressures in every part of her life. She was working for an airline, giving frequent speeches, competing in races, setting records, and supporting her family. Fatigue and emotional strain accumulated. She needed support, and she turned again to George Putnam. Putnam, now divorced, wished to marry her. Amelia had declined several proposals in the past, suspicious of any arrangement that might limit her independence. Yet this situation felt different. George was 10 years older, with 2 grown sons, and he understood that her career was central to her identity. He was prepared not only to accept that, but to promote it. She decided to take the step. On February 7, 1931, Amelia Earhart and George Putnam were married. From the outset, they agreed on a crucial point: her career would continue. In legal terms, she became Amelia Earhart Putnam, but the public and the press remained attached to the name they already knew. Newspapers and newsreels continued to call her simply Amelia Earhart, and the world would remember her that way. As her public identity remained unchanged, the aviation world around her was rapidly evolving. By 1931, the slow wooden aircraft of earlier decades had given way to faster, sturdier machines built from metal. New instrumentation improved navigation and made long-distance flying far safer than before. Aircraft were growing larger as well, capable of carrying more passengers than anyone of the previous generation would have imagined. Gradually, the public began to accept the idea of travelling by air. A journey from New York to Washington that once required 4 hours by train could now be completed in 2.5 by plane. In 1930, United Airlines introduced the nation's first flight attendants, all of them nurses, who provided comfort to passengers and cared for those who fell ill during turbulent flights. Across the United States, women were taking to the skies in greater numbers. More than 450 were now licensed pilots. With this growing community, it became increasingly difficult for any single aviator to capture widespread public attention. Amelia Earhart understood the need to remain visible, and with George Putnam's support, she searched for new ways to distinguish herself. She began flying an autogyro, a machine that resembled an early helicopter. With it, she became the first person to fly across the country and back in such an aircraft. The autogyro, however, was unstable and difficult to handle, and many pilots doubted its safety. Amelia eventually returned to conventional airplanes, but the journey demonstrated her willingness to explore the frontiers of flight. In January 1932, she set her sights on something far greater. As she considered her future in aviation, she decided to attempt a solo flight across the Atlantic Ocean. Her husband, George Putnam, supported the idea wholeheartedly. He knew the significance of becoming the first woman to cross the Atlantic alone. May 20th, 1932, marked the 5th anniversary of Charles Lindbergh's legendary transatlantic crossing. Putnam believed that departing on the same date would attract the interest of the press, and the symbolism appealed to Amelia as well. Her aircraft was equipped with new instruments, including 3 compasses, essential for navigating the unpredictable weather over the Atlantic. She projected confidence in public, yet privately she felt the weight of the challenge ahead. She departed from Harbour Grace in Newfoundland, knowing the flight would demand everything from her. Icing formed on the wings as she climbed, forcing her to descend. When she dropped too low, moisture and cold caused her instruments to fail. She spent long hours in darkness, adjusting her altitude, rationing her strength, and fighting the elements. Fuel dripped onto her neck from an auxiliary tank. She sustained herself with sips of chicken soup. At sunrise, she finally saw land. Amelia Earhart touched down in a pasture in Ireland, startling the grazing cattle and securing her place in history as the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. The world responded with admiration. She was 34, courageous, poised, and celebrated everywhere she went. In New York, a parade down Broadway honored her achievement. The next day, she flew to Washington, where President Herbert Hoover presented her with a medal. Despite the fame, Amelia remained grounded in her quiet, thoughtful way. Yet she understood the influence her voice now carried. She joined the National Women's Party and advocated for equal opportunities, insisting that every individual had the right to earn a living. Her growing recognition led to new ventures. Amelia was known for her distinctive style, and soon she collaborated with Macy's to launch a clothing line designed for active women. She preferred fabrics that resisted wrinkling and garments that required simple care, believing fashion should suit a modern, practical life. Still, aviation remained her true passion. In 1935, she undertook another historic flight, becoming the first person to fly solo from Honolulu to California. Her journey of 2,500 miles across the Pacific ended safely in Oakland after 18.5 hours in the air. Success brought its own pressures. Some critics argued that she took unnecessary risks. Others accused George Putnam of seeking profit from her accomplishments. Amelia began to feel confined by the expectations around her. Each new record demanded greater distances and greater expense, yet one final challenge continued to call to her. She wanted to fly around the world. Although others had circled the globe, Amelia intended to follow a route near the equator, creating a journey of 29,000 miles. To complete it, she needed a special aircraft. She chose the Lockheed Electra, a 10-passenger plane that she had stripped of seats and fitted with additional fuel tanks. The Electra carried new radio equipment and twin engines that required careful training. Amelia spent months preparing, flying with several experienced pilots to master the aircraft. She and George hired 2 navigators to accompany her on the journey. The first attempt began on March 17, 1937, with a planned east-to-west route. Amelia and her crew flew from Oakland to Honolulu. The initial leg was a success, but while attempting to take off again from Honolulu, she lost control. The landing gear collapsed, damaging a wing and grounding the Electra. The aircraft was shipped back to the mainland for repairs. 2 months passed before it was ready. One navigator could no longer continue, leaving only Fred Noonan. Weather conditions also forced a change in plans. Amelia would now fly west to east. On May 21st, she departed from Oakland and flew to Miami, where the world's press followed her movements closely. The journey progressed smoothly at first. From Miami, she flew to Puerto Rico, then south along the coast of South America to Venezuela, Suriname, and Brazil. Inside the cramped cabin, she communicated with Noonan by passing notes along a fishing rod to avoid navigating over the fuel tanks. She crossed the Atlantic and flew across Africa. In 3 weeks, Amelia travelled 20,000 miles in 135 hours of flight. Exhaustion began to set in. The long legs of the trip grew harder. By July 1st, she reached New Guinea. Only 7,000 miles remained, most of them stretching across the vast Pacific. The next destination was Howland Island, a tiny speck of land that would serve as the crucial refueling point for the final legs home. At dawn on July 2nd, Amelia and Fred Noonan departed New Guinea. They stayed in radio contact with the mainland for 7 hours before moving beyond its range. A United States Coast Guard cutter waited near Howland to guide them in with radio signals. Throughout the night, faint messages from Amelia reached the ship, but the crew could not determine her location. She appeared unable to hear their responses. At 7:42 in the morning, the Coast Guard received a final coherent transmission. Amelia reported that they were near the island but could not see it, and that their fuel was running low. Attempts to answer her went unheard. At 8:45, another transmission came through. It was fragmented and brief. Amelia reported that they were running north and south, searching for Howland Island in the empty Pacific. It was the last time anyone heard her voice. The search that followed was immense. More than 4,000 men aboard 10 ships scoured the ocean. 65 aircraft joined the effort, yet no trace of Amelia Earhart or Fred Noonan was found. In the years that followed, speculation flourished. Some believed the Electra had crashed into the Pacific. Others imagined she had reached an uninhabited island or been captured during wartime. None of these theories has ever been proven. Even today, the mystery endures. Teams continue to investigate remote islands near Howland, and advanced underwater vehicles scan the ocean floor in hopes of finding the Electra. Whether the aircraft is ever discovered, Amelia Earhart's legacy remains secure. She broke barriers, set records, and opened doors for women worldwide. Her life demonstrated courage, discipline, and an unshakable belief that determination can carry a person across any horizon.